Southern Soul Livestream is a weekly talk show and music hangout where the hosts learn your name and just might remind you of a favorite relative. We spotlight fascinating people, discuss current events, and pay special attention to lifting up generations. So if you want to know more, learn more, be more, or just be, Southern Soul Livestream is the place for you. Join us every Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern. Just log on, kick back, and experience the eclectic vibe. Check us out at soullivestream.com.
Tonight's story is about the true story of Oklahoma black towns. We will be spotlighting some awesome historians tonight. Dr. Daryl Green, Dr. Trina Jackson. We will have inspiration from the story of Jessalyn Head and her late husband. We will also have a quilt historian, Beverly Kirk, give us some insight into this incredible history. But before we get started, let me set a backdrop. We did the survey and we talk about this history. Let me guys take you back in time of when this Indian territory in Oklahoma became a new state. There was a newspaper called the Muscat Scimitar, and this is what it says. It was a black person-owned newspaper that proclaimed excitement and hope for black people in Oklahoma. Right the day before Oklahoma became a state, this is what it wrote. To our colored friends throughout the United States, we send you greeting. And the ad said, the Indian Territory in Oklahoma are now a new state. There was some excitement in this backdrop. There was opportunity. There was hope. As stated in the survey, Oklahoma was once home of over 50 black towns. Now, barely 13 remain. Tonight, we will discuss the role of black towns and other settlements in Oklahoma as social, cultural, and historical hubs, especially during the era of Jim Crow, segregation, and black codes. Starting out tonight, we have my brother, Dr. Daryl Green. How you doing, brother? Let's get you spotlighted on the screen.
I'm blessed. You played several of my songs, and I'm ready. I'm ready to go. I'm fired up. Can I hit it? Can I hit a wall? What's going on?
That's all right. Well, thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for inspiring this and sharing with us so many of the historians to get us started tonight. You have taken a unique approach. I hadn't seen this before, but in your own time, in your own efforts, you started infusing research that's entitled The Marketing Strategy to Create Economic Empowerment and for these black towns. Tell us why you did this and how you got started and who you worked with along the way.
Well, Calvin, a great show. So I just want to give honor to God. I mean, I in 2016, God led me to Oklahoma Baptist University, where I teach. I teach business and marketing. And one of the things I was looking for a church, and I found a church I found in Oklahoma City is remarkable. The St. John Missionary Baptist Church, which is led by Major Jameson. And the reason why I say that is because I went to this church and I had never seen a church that had so many role models. I mean, we have two judges. We have superintendents. We have all these professors. Doctors. I had never seen it in my life. And so I want to give honor I met Andre, the late Andre and Jessalyn Head. They were there and they started talking about the Oklahoma black towns. I started getting involved, trying to be with them. I was just overwhelmed because I had no understanding of the Native Americans, the Trail of Tears, those black towns. So I had no idea. And I just want to give you a chapter, Nehemiah 1. Nehemiah came back, heard from individuals, asked how the place that you lived, how's it coming, and they told him all the bad news. He just wept. And when I visited some of the towns and I just saw some of the history, and all of these towns are dying, man, it just broke me down, man. And the head again, Andre Head, he's a super guy, and his wife is amazing. And I from that point, I just want to give a shout out to my students and some of my students and colleagues there. But Oklahoma Baptist University allowed me to be myself. And in most, if you look at a lot of predominantly white institutions, you got OU here, OSU. No one, all these academic institutions have that ability. And so the first thing I did was I tried to get my students who were young and eager. I had them work with the heads, and I had my undergraduate students and my graduate students. And my graduate students, they started doing some research, and they left that there. And I was thinking, man, we need to do something with this. And some of the questions, I'm not a historian, I'm a business guy, and so I started looking at a lot of the falsehoods about the Black towns, and nobody knew. A lot of my students didn't know about it. Most of the people in Oklahoma don't even know that the 13 Black towns, which I was amazed that the lack of ignorance. I'm ignorant. I didn't know anything about that and their contributions. And we always get the narrative that those towns, if they know about it, that most Blacks things associated, they're inferior, not good. But just like Greenwood, these places was thriving. And just kind of quickly give some of the history of this. Like I said, I'm not a historian, but we go back to the Trail of Tears, and you had so the Native Americans, they had slaves. I did not know that they had slaves, and from there, those slaves are free, and some of those slaves established those towns, and these towns were thriving. And one of the things that they were doing well, like I said, Guthrie at one time was the capital of Oklahoma. I did not know that, and they were doing so well. And so I'd say the institution, the government, and other individuals, they tried to choke those towns, economically. The Jim Crow, the Black codes, or whatever. But those things choked it, and we see urban revitalization. But all these things have done that, and so what I tried to do is try to look at it from a standpoint: what do those towns need, and that's what we talked about. And I had to do the research. I needed to pull in some strength, and so Dr. Jackson's the entrepreneur expertise, and the ACBSP chairman Debbie Glasper. I pulled those in because I needed help, and most of if you think about most of the predominantly white institutions, they are not doing anything. They're not doing anything for these Black towns or doing any research on that. So we have filled the gap. We're not just doing we're actually focused on the business, the marketing, to let you know these towns were thriving.
Okay. Well, awesome. Thank you for getting us started there and sharing us the backdrop. What I'd like to do next is go to Beverly. Miss Beverly Kirk, you got a chance to work with Jessalyn Head and her late husband on some of the research. Do you mind giving us a backdrop of how you got in started, what you do, and some of the work that you got to see in observing the Head family? And for many of us who have not met them, telling us who they are and what they did.
Again, let me say good evening to you. I too, like Daryl, was enthusiastic. There was a young man named Hannibal Johnson who has written books, and he held tours earlier in the mid 2015, 16, and I didn't hitch up with them. But when Andre Head came along, he did indeed sponsor a bus full of 40 to 50 persons, and he timed those bus trips that were filled in advance to go to the 13 Black towns to make it a learning experience, such that there was a gumbo festival annually in Grayson. Langston University would have their football season or other significant events. Renniesville has an annual jazz festival. And so we stayed late into the night and well into the morning because this was a time that we learned what these towns had to offer, as well as the Bowley Rodeo is held annually in May. So in our visits, we were trying as well to highlight the high points of the historical significance of these 13 remaining Black towns. And they label them as HBT. Hold on, I've got a few things going. And the HBT historical Black towns, and the visits each time were just to the point that we learned a lot in what we did and were able to do.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Tell us about your project, because you're not only a historian, you're a person who quilts, right?
Okay. Well, when I heard Andre said he was onto something and he thought he might need someone, okay, quilting became, and you can see how excited I get, but nevertheless, to learn about a town, females and women were doing the cooking, the sewing, and that created bonds of friendship that you can carry on from generation to generation to generation. You may be familiar with the G's Benz quilts, and that was an isolated community that the craft was taught. But quilt making is so much more than a backing, the front, and the batting. It's where women sit and they're able to share stories, share heartaches. I've quilted with women who've been married 50 years, and I was looking for, how did you do it? While we sat there and cut fabric and sewed it together and matched the colors. I also went to these towns looking for women that would create significant markers from their town's history. If it was cotton, if it were mayors, because many times you can post a picture on a quilt and then embellish it. So our goal was to obtain 13 quilts that would be representative. And I myself quilted a quilt that contained pictures of these 13 towns in my own regard of how I saw them. And it's a continuing goal to grasp what the town was about. Those quilts traveled when they moved, but they were for utilitarian purposes and have since been lost and used up. But you have that same creative spirit in women and daughters and others that left that community. One thing I want to say, I'm also involved in the Metropolitan Library that's going to do a search for quilts made before 1910. And I would like to see African Americans bring some of these artifacts from under the bed that we can record if they were made out of feed sack or overalls, if they had wool battings, because Blacks used whatever they had to make quilts that was bedding. But many times there were beautiful bits of lace and intricate handwork that applied to quilt that reflected the inner beauty of a woman that would sit down, dog-tired, and say, I'm going to do something for me, and I'm going to pass it on to my children. So that's where our enthusiasm continues to this day in seeking quilts that will tell a story of the people and their time and their place in history.
Awesome. You know, I love that. I'll tell you why. Is as we get into the conversation, we'll discover that the essence and the nuance of what you're talking about is that passion and excitement around documenting history. And as we get into the session, I brought some other people to talk about what happens when we don't document our history. And I love the story that you tell, even though it's around quilting, it's your passion and your excitement that leads to documenting history in a way that it is not lost. Let's bring in another panelist. Dr. Trina Jackson. Dr. Trina Jackson, you also work with this team additionally with the Head family, and I see it's been posted about who the Head family. We're going to talk more about them and share information and video about them later, so definitely hold tight. But Dr. Trina Jackson, tell us about your involvement in this project, in your perspective, what you do, and your participation in documenting these Oklahoma Black towns.
First of all, I'm going to make a quote that I always state specifically as it relates to us. Black history should not be a mystery. Our history, in fact, is the evolution of change. We, in fact, were the innovators. We, in fact, were the creators. So Black Wall Street, we were the original Wall Street. But unfortunately, we had to assign color to all the amazing things that we have done. So again, we are American history, and it is important that people understand that. It was an honor to work with Daryl Green, and I thank him and his amazing students, because these were not students of color. So they had an opportunity, in all honesty, to learn as well. So again, it's very important for all of us to share our history, because we are truth tellers. We tell the truth. And Calvin, in our initial discussion prior to the taping, we talked about all the things as creators we have been during slave times with music. In those churches, when we sang the gospel, we were singing about opportunities to escape, because in fact, we were enslaved. And a lot of people don't realize when you hear that song, there's a message in our music. We, in fact, were, actually reciting messages. And we continue to do that, no matter what type of music it is. I want to make a note for everyone that in 2021, I don't know why we had to wait 100 years. The United States actually recognized the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa massacre. So it's important that everyone know that. I would like to see, and we have a responsibility, every single person listening, to share the article, and that article will be available to everyone. But we have to speak these truths in the classrooms, because they are not in the textbooks. So it is our responsibility, I guess, to maybe research open educational resources, which is considered OER, to press our publishers to, in fact, include. Can you believe the economic books do not actually talk about Wall Street? And again, why is it Black Wall Street? We were the original Wall Street. So we have a responsibility to really press our publishers to start updating these textbooks. Everyone's in arms talking about, are we going to change what's in the textbooks? No, we just want the truth. And that's what we are. We're truth tellers. And my responsibility is to encourage, to uplift, and continue the telling of our stories. Everyone in this audience, you have a story to tell. And it's important that we start telling our truths and applying that to our history. What I'm doing right now, and Kelvin, I want to extend a thank you to you, actually have a Zoom at Noon series. That Zoom at Noon is featuring Black entrepreneurs. So every Friday at noon, we're doing that. So again, we have a responsibility to ensure that we're imparting. Why do I have to say our knowledge? Why do I have to say Black knowledge? We're Americans. But again, we have to do constant reminders, because we have not been able to tell our truths, and they have not been incorporated in the real truths of the Americas. Because we already know Christopher Columbus did not what? No, he didn't.
America.
No, he didn't. So again, as educators and as my audience is listening, we have a responsibility to start truly telling the real story. And we have to be active in that as well. So all we're trying to do is to draw attention to the truths, especially as it relates to what happened in Oklahoma. And I encourage everyone, once the pandemic has waned, we need to sponsor bus trips. We need to go and support Mrs. Head because she's still there. And we want to give reverence to the late Andre Head. I had an opportunity to actually listen to them as they shared their remarkable research. And I want to extend to Dr. Green the opportunity for me to be able to be a part of that. And I'm going to continue talking about and sharing, and we're going to continue to do additional research as well. So thank you, Calvin, for allowing me to say a few words.
Thank you, Dr. Trina Jackson. So there's some mystery in the room, and I want to speak to that. Who are the Head family? Tamika, if you don't mind sharing the link of the press release that I shared with you so the audience can have it. In that press release, you will find the research that has been done. So if you're looking for the historical numbers, the towns, the population, all of that is there. Take a look at the press release and look closely at the information of the research publication. It's also linked in the body of that document. Backdrop, the Head family. We're going to share a video with you guys a little later, but let me kind of give you a backdrop. Andre Head, great gentleman. We lost him last year. But before we lost him, he had started his own research nonprofit. Having grown up in one of the historically Black towns, he began to feel a need to document what was unstated, as we all know. So him and his wife come together, they start a nonprofit, and they go out and they start looking for grants. They start looking for ways to finance this information that not only they can go and visit the people who still live in those towns today, but they could show them pictures. They could show them history of their own towns. One of my favorite stories is they're showing a black and white picture that has been given color to one of the young ladies who still lives there today. And she's like, what? There was a bank that used to be in this town? My little one, traffic stop sign town had an awesome bank in it. History that has been lost that no one even knew existed. So we give total respect to the Head family because if it wasn't for Andre having that passion to be a family historian, that we would not have this information and we wouldn't be here today. But we're not going to stop there because one of the things we're going to do tonight is not only talk about the problem, we're going to step into some of the answers. What's some of the answers? How can you have a Black town history if you don't have family history? But hold tight, we're going to talk about that a little later. So let's go back to Dr. Green and open panel. Tell us some of the things that you guys kind of discovered about these towns, some of the aha moments, some of the great moments, some of the celebrations, because I honestly tell you, when I told people, hey, we're going to do a show on Oklahoma and the towns, this is what they told me. Oh, you're going to do a show on Tulsa? I'm like, and I'm thinking Tulsa. I'm like, no, not Greenwood. Well, you said Oklahoma, you're talking about Greenwood, you're talking about Tulsa. So I'm like, okay, I'll put in the marketing messages, Black Wall Street, because that's what we know. But all of this history was invisible. The only thing people knew about was the tragedy of Black Wall Street. Let's talk about some good news. Anybody have any stories they can share about the Black towns that they experienced? Go ahead.
Well, let me just do a quick one. First I want to give a shout out to Miss Head. She was going to be here, but she just had she's still dealing with her loss of her dear loved husband, and she's also just lost she lost a sister, I think last week, a couple weeks ago, and just lost a niece. So she's really, we got to pray for her. We believe in prayer. So one of the things, shout out to my wife, Esther Lita, married over 30 years, and I always get brownie nose. So I do. So as I am just blessed because all this history I did not know, but because of the Heads. And one of the things, we first got to Shawnee, which is a rural area. I looked in the paper, there was Reynoldsville, that was the blues festival. Now I'm from Louisiana, so Southern University graduate. But we went and took a trip to Reynoldsville. And I'm just gonna let you know, I just want you to think about Color Purple. Think about Color Purple and them going into the places they weren't gonna go into. And I started driving, I didn't find anything. And all of a sudden, in the middle of nowhere, it's this, all these people are gathered around in Rennesville, and you got, I think thousands of people. And then they got a little, I call it a juke joint. Well, some young people, I'll just explain what a juke joint is later in class. But it was a juke joint, and they were playing the blues. And what's amazing about this, what brings us together? There was food and there was music. So we spend so much time on what things that bring us apart. But I saw Black, white, Asians in the middle of nowhere celebrate. And so that's what I think is wonderful. If it's in the middle of nowhere. So that's my story. I know maybe Beverly may have some other ones because she's actually from the area. But that was my glaring moment. We had a great time in Rennesville.
Yeah, while Beverly's working on her microphone, Beverly, just let me know when you're back. I'll share with you a story that I found through my research. One of the things I enjoy about these shows is the amount of research I do and the things I learn. I had a fraternity brother who went to Langston University, and I always knew, they've got multiple Langston universities, the Langston, right, as they say. And I never knew that Langston University is in the city of Langston, which is a historically Black town. And I had a OMG moment. What if these other Black towns throughout the United States had HBCUs? And I began to wonder how the city of Langston benefited from having a HBCU there. And maybe that HBCU of Langston University was what helped it make it through the Great Depression. But while we wait for Beverly to come back, let's begin to talk about something that other people may not realize. The other Black towns throughout the United States. As I stepped into this research, I'm thinking about Black towns, I'm thinking about Oklahoma, and all of a sudden I was like, wait a minute, there are other Black towns? And actually there are. Tamika, if you don't mind sharing in the chat the list of Black towns throughout the United States, what did I discover? There are Black towns scattered all throughout the United States that are right underneath our noses. Towns that we didn't even know about. Beverly is muted, so let me see if we can get her unmuted.
Now I'm unmuted.
There you go. Welcome back.
I wanted to say that the Coltrane group, of which Andre and Jesslyn formed, they sought to put highway with the State Department of Transportation and state leaders to put notable highway exit signs into Bowley, into Clearview, because you can drive for miles and not know, as Daryl said, right around the corner, down the side street, you'll get lost in the mud if a cow doesn't cross the street. But there are vibrant communities. There's a prison located next to Taft, and they have paved street, but the town of Taft doesn't. So we now have markers on our state highways that tell you the exit to go to Bowley, Clearview, Rennesville, Vernon. Tatum's has long been established. The other thing they did was to set aside that there were maybe 40 by 40 signs that were standing 6 feet tall that they're all look alike, but each one of them tells the particular history, noting this as a Black town, so that when you enter the town, you have a historical marker. So I traveled with them to City Hall meetings where they were trying to get the gym fixed up and trying not to lose a program to feed whatever the food program that comes to being time, so that their municipality would remain vibrant. So there's work to be done that they are willing to ask individuals to assist.
So thank you for sharing that. I love that story. It reminds me of the question. We now know these towns exist. We now know that there's a need. We now know that they're scattered all throughout the United States, right underneath our nose. Daryl Green, in your research, what was your goal to accomplish? How do you believe that these towns could be supported, should be supported, and why?
Great, great question. One of the things that I always think, so we have a think tank. I started a think tank called the Talent 10 Think Tank, and a lot of these people in the loop, they're Black scholars that get together. And one of the things I think is that universities it could be a resource, but they don't want to. Most of them don't want to spend time helping Black communities. But it's a resource. I mean, it's economical. But one of the things in terms of that, I think coming together, I say a single marketing plan. As Beverly mentioned, you go down like we're going to Rennesville. There's no signage, and in most of those towns, there's no signage. And if you're trying to get to like in Grayson, they have a gumbo. They're from Louisiana. Most of those folks are from Louisiana. They're like my cousins. I mean, green, whites, blues. That's what we did to the plantation. We had but a lot of those individuals came from Louisiana, and they have a gumbo. Well, you're talking about a place that, I don't know, maybe 100, 200 people, and they're trying to service the whole, anybody who shows up. There's, they have, the mayor is good, but the infrastructure, most of the people that's trying to do it, they're senior citizens. And so I just think bringing those things together, I think doing those resources and pulling together, I think of the towns, I'd say one unified marketing plan. And I've seen this done in South Carolina, in Charleston. There's a tour, people come around. And I think these towns are going to mainly survive tourism. It's going to be huge. And I think senior citizens that like to travel after COVID is down, those individuals, one of the things that I think the heads are working on was the Green Book. Watch the movie, and then you can talk to me. But watch the movie. But all of these places was tied into the Green Book. So those are my things. I think we could come together, have champions. But I just think you have to. If the towns don't come together, I just think it's just not sustainable. Just because they don't have the infrastructure and don't have the financial resources. But if we can pull together like we've done in the past, I think that is what could be successful for those towns.
Yeah, I definitely.
Let me just add, Dr. Green, because we're marketers as well. So we're always planning in advance. Again, my month of February is booked because I planned in advance. And our focus has to be on planning in advance. I don't take 1 month out of the year to celebrate my people of color. I take every day, and everyone's heard this, 365 days. But now we really have to focus on Juneteenth is coming up too. We can't wait. We have to start planning now to celebrate Juneteenth. For so many years, people were celebrating the 4th of July. That's not ours. Ours is Juneteenth, and we have to focus on that. For so many years, people would celebrate, women's voting rights. Women of color were not allowed to vote. So we have to understand our history, and we need to know our history. And I want to make a special note to our listening audience. People, you have to vote. You have to vote. It is critical now. We're change makers, but I'm also a truth teller as well.
Awesome. I love that concept of planning to celebrate, planning for Juneteenth, planning for Black History Month. Dr. Green, you said something that segues to the next point that I think I want to bring out. As you can see in the research, Tamika put it in the chat, and if you got here, we'll put the links in the chat, and it also is going to be in the post notes of the show. But what we shared tonight is a story of the Head family, who were very instrumental in kickstarting this history in Oklahoma. However, in other cities and other areas, since we shared a list of national Black towns, down in the Southeast, there's what's called a Black Towns and Settlement Alliance. I discovered they just had a session last week, and I missed it, but I want to give them a shout out. So Tamika, if you don't mind sharing their link. I love their model, and I love what they did. They have educators. They have actually mayors from certain Black towns who participate in their alliance. And what they do is they work together and they collaborate on education, awareness, and resources. One of the key things that the head was working on is tourism. Tourism and grants. As you do your research, you'll discover one of the organizations that was offering grants was the National Parks and Recreation. So it's definitely going to, I always tell people, it's going to cost you one of three things: time, money, or creativity. But tourism is important, restoring that heritage, capturing those oral stories. And we're going to talk about that a little tonight because we have Miss Sandra Taitt-Eaddy on here tonight, who is a genealogy specialist. And as we talk to Peter, we're going to talk about stories of what good looks like when we have seen solid, good family heritage kept safe. Because as I would say, if we don't have family history, we can't have town history. But let's step back for a second. Let's go ahead and go to the audience. But before I go to the audience with Q&A, what I would like to do is give the panel a chance to speak on anything that you hadn't spoke on yet, because I know we had a panelist that couldn't make it because of personal things with the family. But is there anything that the panelists would like to speak on that we hadn't? Because what I want to do is open it up to Q&A before we step into our genealogy and family history experts.
Let me just add quickly, Calvin, and I apologize because I didn't provide my link. I'm actually having a grant writer tomorrow on my Zoom at noon. So I host a Zoom at noon on Fridays, and I will have Allison Vax. She has an Ask Allie Consulting, and she's a grant writer. So what I've been trying to do, again, is host people of color that have this expertise. But I'll send that Zoom at noon link to you so that you can share that with the listening audience. It's noon Central Standard Time.
Actually, Tamika, she's on top of it. She had already put it in the chat. I mean, we run a tight ship here. We got you.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. And Tamika shared that. And if anybody missed it, just ping her as the admin and she'll make sure you get that information. So let's go open questions for the audience. We've given you the backdrop. We've given you the story. We've given you the problem. What do you consider are some of the challenges? What do you feel that we could do to not only document this history, but to better understand and capture? And of course, the obvious question is, why is all of this important? Because I live on both ends. The place where I totally get it and also the other end where I don't get it. So all questions are fair. What do we have from the audience?
If you don't mind, I'd like to ask a question. First of all, this is very enlightening. I had typed in the chat that I had watched a special a few years ago on PBS about the African-American towns in Oklahoma. And, you know, this is something that we in other parts of the United States need to know about. I mean, yeah, like you said, I mean, they've nationalized about Tulsa, but there's more, like you said, to Oklahoma than Tulsa. The 13 predominantly African American towns, and this information, like I said, it needs to get out. So please try to direct us towards links on it, whatever. So, and I would definitely like to share with my students, because as I typed in the chat, I've been talking about Black Wall Street for the last my last 18 years of teaching at the community college. So now, starting this semester, or if not this semester, in the fall, I want to start talking about these 13 African-American towns. So that's all I want to say on this.
Yeah, and Peter, that's a great segue. Thank you. And I'm definitely going to connect you with Dr. Green, because I'm pretty sure that you guys, like-minded, can definitely benefit from some sort of alliance. Peter is our expert on Detroit history. He teaches history and civil rights at the university. But let's go to the audience. I got some questions to get us started, but I want to give another person a chance to, and we're open here. So whatever question you have, feel free to put it in the chat. If you put it in the chat, or you can say it out loud, your choice. And while we're waiting on that question, I'm going to get us started with a question. So Dr. Green, I'm going to position this one to you. What are your thoughts on the implications of economic empowerment for Black American economics based on this history that we have seen?
So,
often people, go ahead.
No, go ahead, finish it.
I said often people would, be a bit hey, if we have our own thing, if we had our own thing. The story of these black towns is the obvious reality. Yeah, we've had our own thing. But as you can imagine, based on the backdrop of Jim Crow, these black codes, what do you think this means to Black American economic empowerment and some of the dynamics we, see or could see?
So I think it's important, even with my students. So I think in terms of blacks, I think there's an inferior because the culture is, you know, when you see excellence, it's not Afro Americans, and you go with I look at a book, the top 100 leaders. You might have Martin Luther King. So I think the history part of that for me, I'm just going to tell you, it's understanding the 13 black towns or the 50 black towns and see what they had to go through, and they were thriving. So here's the thing I want to make this clear. Everybody always, I'm a business guy. Everybody always talks about capitalism, and I'm a capitalist person. But in most cases, for us, it's been barriers have been put in place that you cannot be successful. And so I think that's why I think if you want to do something, do it. Like I said, I looked at the think tanks. There weren't any black think tanks. There was no bringing us together. So I think that we have to empower ourselves. Anyone who wants to. So here's what I tell people: everyone that looks like me is not my friend, and everyone that does not look like me is not my enemy. So if you down with empowerment, and I think if we, the Bible says the least of these. So I think for United States, it's Afro Americans. And so if you can get down with this, but I think it's the history part of it, just to know that we've come so far along, and that we don't have to be the worker. We could actually be running the business, because the history says even when we were denied rights and privileges and things taken away from us, we still managed to make it. So that's what I'm encouraged about, looking at the history and saying, you know what, I can do this. And so that's what I'm encouraged about. That's why I think you have to be an owner. I'm big on that. So I think, like, you look at the NFL, those guys complain, they're making, if we say in the trade, they're making a lot of cheddar. But it's the owners that really make the money. And so I think as long as we are a servant, then we're not going to do it. So that's why I'm big into economic development, pushing the community, doing things. Anybody who wants to come along, great. But I'm not going to wait on people for permission to make those things happen.
Thank you, Dr. Green. I'm going to grab a question out of the chat. There was mention made that the history of Black Wall Street and the history of these black towns needs to be entered into history books. But is there any interest from publishing companies? And if not, how can we rally and make this an opportunity to get this information published?
And this is why I mentioned OER, Open Educational Resources. We have a responsibility to actually start a movement. And that's where you can go, because those are free resources. So we have our 4T think tank group, and now we're going to have to do some focusing on that. So OER is Open Educational, and that will allow us that opportunity. But it takes time to do that. And we're going to need collaborative research. And that's why I appreciate Dr. Green, because he really has his students. And let me just state this is important. It has to be all students. It can't necessarily be students of color, because it's an opportunity for us all to learn about our history. Our history is American history. But we have to, clearly make people understand that our Black history was not incorporated in our history books. So if we're able to start there, that's a launching pad for us. With all of our book publishers, everyone's talking about, DEI, and they're opening up the doors for everyone. I take issue with that. We are VPs, we are presidents. You didn't have to create a position for us. We've always been there. but this is where we have to start, in all honesty.
So,
And I want to.
let me dig into that for a second, real quick, Dr. Green, because you mentioned that twice, Dr. Jackson, and I didn't get it the first time. OER, open educational resources. And for the non-academics here, I think I'm picking up what you're putting down, right? It sounds like similar to an open forum, or information can be published by anyone in certain places, to where if we come together, do knowledge sharing, and document the history, then we can publish it ourselves in a way that it can be digested. Now, I just did an interpretation, but can someone, clean that up for me?
Calvin, you were right on target. You were on target. You're an academic. You're right on target.
Yeah.
But again, Dr. Green, we're going to have to pass this on to our 4T group, our think tank, to start focusing on it. And I encourage others to do the same. It should not be limited to one particular group. We can all start doing this. However, you have to have credible references in order for this information to be published. To our advantage, Dr. Green actually has a relative who is an expert at this. So, that's to our advantage. I'll pause there.
Dr. Green, that sounds like we should definitely do some OER type conversations. Go ahead, Dr. Green.
Yeah. The one thing, so I think the question is might be kind of wrong. So my thing, I'm not trying to go to a publisher, and I know it's not academic. That's not what I'm supposed to say. But what I'm saying, I have two textbooks that are by a traditional publisher. They're not going to publish what I want to do. So I created my own publishing company. I do my own thing. And maybe the academics, they think that's bad. But I'm saying if the information is out there. So what I'm saying is there are other routes. I think like the young people. You got social media. You got all these new platforms, open resources. We're publishing. We're writing academic things, focusing on a niche. The goal is to focus on a niche. And people that are interested. So my thing is, I'm not going to wait. I'm too old now to be waiting for permission. I'm tired of that. So if I think there's something needs to be done, I need to publish something. I need to get the information out. I need to form the groups. We just do it. I don't need permission.
Yeah, I love that response, Dr. Green, because it alludes to something that I've definitely been told about publishing companies. Is that sometimes those places aren't for us, or they don't care about our message. As we segue into the next thing, that's actually a perfect segue. I want to bring in and spotlight Peter and Sandra, because they're going to talk into some of the practical things they've seen. But before I step into them, I just want to say thank you to our Oklahoma historians. And you guys hang tight, because what we're going to talk about now is not only the problem, but I often say what good looks like. And it's not about the silver bullet, but it's about sometimes you have a small niche that's doing it, and we can all benefit from that. Let me read to you guys the backdrop. In the Washington Post, Norman Crockett writes about his book, The Black Towns. And he says, there was not much documented about the daily lives, aspiration, and fears of people living in such towns as Blackdom, Hobson City, Alabama, Allensworth, California, Wrightsville, Oklahoma, because the residents failed to record their experiences, and whites were not interested in preserving and collecting material on Black towns. People often say, why is Black history so negative? Why is it so sad? Well, as I did the research for the show, I discovered that it's typically when a slave ship sinks, that's documented, or when a Black Wall Street burns down, that's documented. But what about the hopes, the dreams, the excitement, the passion? My belief is that's on the onus of others, that being us, to document that. So up first, we got Peter Boykin. You guys already heard Peter tonight. Peter, if you don't mind introducing yourself and tell us about what you do, and more specifically, tell us about the legacy of Johnson Whitaker. one of the first African Americans at West Point University.
Once again, Calvin, thank you for the invitation, and to the other panelists. I'm enjoying this very intellectual dialogue. I'm a native of Detroit, Michigan, born and raised. I went to Hampton University, where I received my bachelor's in history. Also, I have a master's in secondary education from Howard University, and also have a master's in public relations from Michigan State University. I've been in the field of education now for 22 years. I started off as a long-term sub when I was finishing up my graduate work at Howard. I long-term subbed in the Montgomery County, Maryland school system right outside Washington, D.C. Then I went over to Virginia, was at Falls Church. And upon graduation from Howard, I landed a job teaching 9th grade world history and 10th grade world geography at Woodbridge High School in Prince William County, which is about 25, 30 minutes south of DC on I-95. I've been up and down 95, and passed right through where I used to live. Came back to Detroit in January 2004. I've been at Wayne County Community College District, where I teach basic college survey courses in African American history, U.S. history, and world civilization or world history. And I enjoy history with a passion. It is definitely my lifeline. And we're going to talk tonight about Johnson Chestnut Whitaker. And actually, there's an Oklahoma connection in my family. I'll get to that towards the end of my presentation. My great-great-grandfather, and this is on my dad's side of the family, this is my paternal grandmother's grandfather. He was born a slave, 1858, in Camden County, South Carolina. If you're not familiar with South Carolina, Camden County is right outside the capital, Columbia. He was freed at age 8. And then when he started to go into his educational matriculation, he went to a high school that the University of South Carolina had during Reconstruction. So a lot of opportunities for African Americans during Reconstruction. He took, I think, some college courses. He was just a phenomenal, exceptional student, straight A student. So there he befriended Richard Greener, who was the first African American to get a bachelor's degree from Harvard in Massachusetts. Dr. Du Bois was the first to get African American to get a PhD, but Richard Greener was the first African American to get an undergraduate degree from Harvard. Also, he went to Howard Law School, taught at Howard Law School, and then he worked in the office of the United States as a clerk for the U.S. Comptroller. So my great-great-grandfather told Professor Greener he wanted to go to West Point and serve in the military. He wrote a recommendation letter, he got in. So now he enters West Point in the fall of 1776. Let's look at the date here, 1776. So this is nearing the end of Reconstruction. And as you can imagine back then, there weren't that many African-American cadets there. There was George Washington Murray. And then, of course, there was Henry Ossian Flipper, the first African-American cadet to graduate from West Point. He and my great-great-grandfather actually, Flipper came out, I think around 1876, 1877. So after Flipper graduated, my great-great-grandfather was the lone African-American cadet at West Point. And he was seen basically as a non-factor there by the white cadets. They would spit in his food in the mess hall with orders. They would see him as the invisible man for recreation. They would have sparring matches in the gym, and he couldn't really fight them physically like in a major boxing match because it would lead to expulsion. He received death threats. He received one that said, "Cadet Whitaker better keep awake a friend." So he was supposed to graduate in May of 1880. So 2 months shy of what would have been his graduation, he was found tied with his hands like this to the, thank you, Ms. Barnes, for posting information on my great-great-grandfather. He was found with his hands tied to the bedstead, like, posted on the bed, on the floor, bleeding profusely with pieces of glass from a handheld mirror by his earlobe. And they actually cut off part of his earlobe. So they had concocted this nefarious thought that maybe he was trying to commit suicide. And he brought in Richard Greener as his defense, along with Daniel Chamberlain, who was white. He was abolitionist and former governor of South Carolina. They had moved the court martial from West Point, 100 miles south to New York City, just to protect everybody and just for, a different venue. And they brought in all these psychologists, and I mean, it was just like really a bunch of fallacies about my great-great-grandfather. The psychologist was saying that one said Africans were born to obey rather than command, meaning they were meant to be docile. And no white cadet really sided with my great-great-grandfather. It's like they were saying a white cadet would never resort to such, a low type of, malicious activity. So he was found guilty and faced 2 years in a federal prison labor camp. But President Chester Arthur overturned it. He went on back to South Carolina, got married, had 2 sons, Johnson Whitaker Jr. and Miller Whitaker. And my great-great-grandmother's name was Paige Harrison. Then she became Whitaker. And I forgot to mention one thing. My great-great-grandfather was born on the Mulberry Plantation, which was the largest plantation in South Carolina and one of the largest in the South. So getting back to my story, he went on to Claflin University in Orangeburg, HBCU, got a law degree. He taught in the Industrial Arts High School at South Carolina State because, HBCUs had, I'm sure, I know Langston probably had this, high schools for African Americans since the schools were segregated. And then he practiced law in Sumter and Charleston. And then he decided before he left South Carolina, he went into education. So then he moved to Oklahoma City around 1900. And he moved into all-white neighborhood. He was the first African American to move into all-white neighborhood in Oklahoma City. And then pretty much by the time my great-grandfather's brother had come back from World War I, the antagonism really had escalated. Because as you all know, after World War I, when the veterans came, Black veterans came back, they were lynching African-American men and antagonizing them. And this is all before, the decimation of Black Wall Street and Rosewood. So a white newspaper reporter, this is about 1920, year before Black Wall Street was destroyed, came to their home outside Oklahoma City. And he asked him, why are you staying there? So he actually told the white newspaper reporter about what happened at West Point. And the white newspaper reporter used the headline he cabled in by a phone, because they didn't have computers back then, of course, said, Negroes have arsenal. As a result of that, the attack stopped. And so he would then return to South Carolina and die there. He did go around to speak somewhat about the West Point incident, but didn't do it really aggressively. So now we fast forward to 1972, late 60s, 1972. Dr. John Marszalek, who was a historian, at that time, he was at a small private college in Erie, Pennsylvania. I'm sorry, I can't think of the name of it right now. He was at the National Archives, and he's a Civil War historian, and he stumbled upon I think it was 10 to 12,000 page transcript of my great-great-grandfather's court martial. It was so intriguing. He did research, looked up my grandmother in Detroit, flew out to Detroit, interviewed her, and said, I'm going to write a book on it. It was called Court Martial, 1972. Really wasn't in a lot of bookstores, pretty much in libraries. We fast forward 11 years to 1993. Movie called Assault at West Point. It was filmed, and the book was retitled in conjunction with the film. And it starred Samuel L. Jackson as Richard Greener. Daniel Chamberlain, you probably remember from Law and Order, he was Daniel Chamberlain, and Seth Gilliam played my great-great-grandfather. It was shot at the Virginia Military Institute. Actually, my grandmother was a consultant and actually had a part in the film. So the film is on YouTube. When I finish speaking, I'll put the YouTube link. It's free. And she was an extra in the film, especially in the court-martial scene. So that garnered the attention of the political brass in South Carolina. James Clyburn, who you all know, had just come into Congress at that time. He was the first African-American congressman elected South Carolina since Reconstruction. Jim Spratt, who was also a Democrat like Clyburn. And then you had the 2 senators, Ernest Hollings, former governor Democrat, and then you had Strom Thurmond. So all 4 of them got together. They put bills in the House and the Senate and they said, we need to have some type of reparations for the family. And the reparations was that my great-great-grandfather would get a posthumous commission as a second lieutenant in the military, which is what he would have earned had he had graduated that May. I'll never forget, I was home in the summer of '95 after my first year at Hampton University. That June, my dad got a call about this time at night, 9 o'clock Eastern time. It was the White House. They said, President Clinton wants to have a ceremony for the family. We'll pay all expenses. My parents and I and some cousins were here in Detroit. My grandmother at that time had remarried, was in Los Angeles. They flew her in, and my grandfather, Charlie Piquette, in from Los Angeles. And my cousin Jason Waddell was at Hampton. He took the train up. They brought everybody together in DC. We had 2 African-American Army escorts who were from, I think, Fort Myer, which is right next to the Pentagon, picked us up from National Airport in DC, stayed at Crystal City, took us to a restaurant right by National Airport on the waterfront. Next day was like a total whirlwind. My dad and Dr. Marslack, I went with them. They were on CBS this morning, rode with them to the studio, came back. Then the whole family went to the Pentagon, gave us a tour of the Pentagon. We had a private luncheon. And then after the private luncheon, we were taken to the to the White House and met President Clinton in the Oval Office and had a receiving line. Then we went in the Roosevelt Room where the ceremony took place. And also, President Clinton gave back the Bible that my great-great-grandfather had. That was his diary at West Point. Everything that happened at West Point to him, all of the attacks were documented. That the court martial had seized the Bible and
Go ahead.
Okay, I'm sorry. The court martial, they had seized the Bible, and it was the National Archives used. My dad tried to get it out because at the time my father was a lawyer. He also asked Congressman John Conyers to get it out. So then the White House said, don't worry, we'll give the Bible. So the Bible's given back to the family. We also have a actual commission. And the Bible was taken to South Carolina State University, where Miller Whitaker, my great-great-grandfather's, one of his sons, was the 3rd president. It was there. But then, interestingly enough, when my dad and I went to inter my grandmother's ashes in 2011 at the family plot, they had moved the Bible to local bank deposits. So my dad and I went in a private room to look at the book. So I'm trying to get the family together now to see if South Carolina State doesn't want the Bible. We're going to try to get that Bible sent to the National African American Museum in DC, where people from around the world can appreciate it. So that's pretty much, in a nutshell, the story of my great-great-grandfather.
OMG. Thank you, Peter, for sharing that story. We have one more person as we step into our agenda. We're running a little long, but this information is so awesome. I appreciate the patience of everyone, and we're going to get to it. We have one more person we want to hear from, but first I want to just say thank you, Peter. One of the questions I had for you that I'm going to skip the other questions because you did it so well, you answered all my questions, is I can only imagine what you have learned about African-American history, the history of our country, through the lens of your family. Do you mind just giving us a quick, 30 seconds of, what have you personally walked away with, understanding, I guess the importance of this documentation and how, I guess, say, how tricky it can be? Any life lessons or any observations you personally?
Well, my takeaway is, my family is one of resilience. This is definitely, I think, I just talked about this today. I'm teaching a dual enrollment class at a high school in Canton, Michigan, outside of Detroit. And these are 11th graders. They were so intrigued about it. So I want to show them that, you can come back. It's just like First Lady Michelle Obama said, when they go low, you can go high. So when they went low against my great-great-grandfather at West Point, he said, I'm going to go higher. And he did. He was, a man of versatility. He was, got a law degree, and he got a degree, he went into education. And that speaks immense volumes, going from being a slave to going to the military academy, being almost left for dead, and then just coming back and contributing to your community. And yes, this information is just so much. There's just so much information out here. to find. I actually went to the archives 2 summers ago. My wife and I were in DC, and I spent the day there. And the gentleman was an African-American gentleman at the archives. He was so elated to hear that when I told him what I was looking up, he said, I watched that movie. I said, I'm his great-great-grandson. And he was just so elated. He gave the royal treatment for me. He said, whatever you need, whatever. Now, I didn't look at all 10,000, 12,000 pages of the transcript. I've been in DC for a couple months. I just looked at a few pages, made some copies, and took back to my dad. But just reading the verbiage in it, it's like I just told you some language. I mean, it just was so infuriating how they demonized my great-great-grandfather. And like I said, history is so important. I mean, you go to my parents' house. I mean, it's like a museum with all these information. And you talk about, I was looking at one of your questions earlier, what are the effective ways to document the history? I think to scan, like I'm trying to, with my dad, he's got so many pictures. And, I'm trying to get him to digitize it, but I'm at the point now, I just don't really have the time with my busy work schedule, doing speaking engagements and doing consulting. We'll probably have to hire somebody professionally to scan all these photographs and documents, because I want to make sure, when he goes on, that I have, access to it, and so do the, other family members.
Awesome. Thank you, Peter. Sandra, you are our finale. Thank you for being so patient. One thing I appreciate about the work you've done as we come close to a close is that this is what you do. I enjoy the title. And one of the things we're definitely going to have to do is, as we kick off our Southern Soul workshop series, to have you come back and teach families how to do the things that Peter is talking about. Now, Sandra, do you mind introducing yourself? But before they do that, I want to give you guys the backdrop of how she describes her work. She describes it as surfing Anglican records for your Caribbean or African American ancestry. Sandra, tell us about you, what you do, and how you help people and their families do these things. And I would love to get your observation from tonight as you sit here and you heard the story of Peter and his awesome heritage, the story of Oklahoma and the undocumented but awesome history that was lost. What's your take on it, Sandra?
Hi, Calvin. Thanks for having me tonight. I've just been enjoying listening to so many of your stories, so many of you who have gotten that bug and that passion to break the silence that was once imposed on our ancestors. And we have been past that mantle. I just think that the stories I've been hearing tonight is exactly the same kind of stories that I've been discovering from doing genealogy. And it doesn't matter what communities you go in, you're going to find that there's so many untold stories that are laying dormant, stories that are told but are forgotten about. And so I do believe that my work has been to draw attention to the fact that we have to tell our stories. Like, we cannot sit back and wait for others. And I've had in the years of genealogy, for example, I was at a historical society in South Carolina, and they had created books from the US Census before they were digitized. And I purchased the books. And when I got home, I was perusing them, and I realized that not one Black citizen in the area was in those books. And when I went back, I said, hey, I bought these books and there are no Black people. And she said, well, the people that commissioned us to do these books, they're not interested in Black people. If Black people want to know the history, I guess they'll have to do it themselves. That stuck. It really stuck with me. I have another case where I'm a member of the Church of God in Christ denomination, and our founder was quite remarkable, having started that church as a former enslaved man from Tennessee, and quite renowned. He was actually born in Shelby County. And when I looked at the books that they put out for their historical town's record, he was not mentioned. And of course I called and I asked, hey, what about Charles Harrison Mason? And I got the same response. Well, he's Black. And well, that's why they're not gonna put him in. And this is not 1950s. This is not 1960s. It's not even the 1990s, right? This is the 2000s. So I think that reinforced for me that the work that I was doing, the work that all of us are doing is really important, not just to us and our families, but to the world, to this country. So Peter, that story about your ancestor who experienced what he experienced at West Point is a perfect example of stories that can lay dormant unless somebody shakes it off and go, here, we need to hear this story today. So that's what my work is about. It's about finding those stories within our families, talking about our unsung heroes, looking at the towns that we were in. Some of them have disappeared. So combing the records and telling those stories and hopefully getting them in writing, that would be the most effective thing. Digitizing what we can, documenting what we can, archiving what we can. So definitely resonates.
Awesome. Thank you, Sandra. Thank you tonight. And I look forward to when we kick off the Southern Soul Masterclass series, because I'm definitely looking forward to you teaching our families a workshop on how we can not only achieve Black town history, but also family history to better support our African American history. Tonight, absolutely. Thank you all for being here tonight. Southern Soul live stream. What you experience here tonight is what we do. A little quirky, a little eccentric, a little goofy, but we like to get to the message. We like to create a safe environment. An environment where people can come and share stories like Peter has shared about his family. The type of stories that we've seen tonight are the ones that we're going to continue to share. Next week, if this is your first time, come on back. We're here every Thursday. We're going to be talking about building family legacy with investing and financial strategy. We're going to talk about the things that, hey, people say, hey, I'm supposed to know how to do that. But sometimes people are not so comfortable saying, I haven't mastered that. One of the first shows I did with Dr. Green was newly retired. Now what? You know that topic. We're retired. We're supposed to know what to do. We're supposed to have it all together. But guess what? Sometimes we don't. But over here at Southern Soul, we talk about it. We break it down. And when we hear terms, I'm like, hey, what does that mean? Because I'm from Texas. But I enjoy being here tonight. Thank you all for being here tonight. We're going to say goodbye to you guys with our local DJ, virtual DJ, DJ Afro Sheen. So thank you all for being here tonight. Look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you for joining us at Southern Soul Livestream Talk Show. Join us weekly at soullivestream.com. If you're joining us live, we'll take a quick music break and then come back for discussion with the audience.